Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolas Rousseau. I'm product manager for IT Asset Management, and we will today have a call on the Business Adapter Studio, which is the integration tool that allows to insert data into ITAM, Flexera One ITAM, and also on FlexNet Manager. So I'm going to share my screen during this session, and so hopefully you see that I'm sharing now my screen in the first slide that shows the title, and I'm moving to the next slide, which normally should show you the previous session. So in case you have an issue reading or seeing the slides changing, pay attention and make sure that you selected the right tab into your Windows or your Internet Explorer or Google Chrome. Okay, so the second slide is showing the list of previous sessions. I just wanted to take a step back. You know, we have been, I've been delivering these sessions for 2 years nearly, starting in July 2021. And I just wanted to give you a reminder that if you attend to this call, to have a look to for instance, the Business Adapter Studio integrations, you can also find in this slide, or also in the SAM Best Practice Hub that I will show a little bit later. You will get the full list of previous sessions that cover various topics such as optimization, management of metering, managing unrecognized applications. I will spend a little bit of time on customizations and creating automations, because if you attend today this call, it's probably that you have a sort of technical angle on the SAM operations. So a number of sessions that you can, of course, go back to and have a look. They're all recorded, like this one. So there will be at the probably next week, early next week, you will get the link to the recording and to the saved presentation. Okay, just checking that everything is going okay, that nobody is complaining about issues. Okay, so I have a feeling this is going okay. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so let's move on, and I'm going to, if somebody sees an issue, please let me know and send eventually a text message, and I will manage that. So moving forward to the presentation, and the agenda will be quite classical. We will have first, the pointers to the last session, which was on Java. I will provide you briefly some news, updates about the SAM Best Practice Hub, and also some news about the coming version, which is for end of June, 28th of June, for IT Asset Management 2023 R1, which basically has similar features to the version that got released a little bit earlier in May. The on-premise version of FlexNet Manager 2023 R1 will contain much more content. So I will describe it a bit. And then we will talk about the Flexera Business Adapter Studio, talking first, about the two versions that you can use, one with the beacon, another which is a full version for on-premise customers. I will give the general principles. I will give tips and tricks, and we'll show some real-life examples with users allocations, purchase order, which is a little bit more complex, RDSCAL license allocation and optimization. So I will not, of course, run each of the integration, but I will show you existing integration that show various levels of things, integrations and automations you can do. And hopefully you will get a global view on what this tool can provide to you. Okay, so I'm going to move forward a little bit, and hopefully hopefully you get all the information. So last session was on Java. hot topic. The recording and PowerPoint are located in this link. So if I click here, so it's so this is here. You see the recording presentation for the May session, recording and presentation. And as usual, you will see there is a detailed, there is a link to the recording. We had some technical issues last month. I was co-presenting with Jan Bocher. So we had some technical issues with both during the session and the recording actually had an issue as well. So we have re-recorded the session. So the video you will see doesn't have the issues you may have experienced. So this is the link to the video, and then you have the detailed agenda, and you can access also and take the PowerPoint version of the presentation that was used, the PDF version of the PowerPoint that was presented. Okay, so just to take a step back, if you go to this events and webinar section of the Community Hub, you will see all the all the presentations and all the past sessions and all the announcements that will give you a heads up on the coming sessions. So please, subscribe to this session, to this part in the community, and you will get the details. Okay. So I'm just sharing back my screen and checking. Okay. So hopefully you see the next slide, about the last session. So this is a recording, and there were some questions during the presentation. So some of the questions were around the Oracle Java worksheet. When is it available? So it will be available for on-premise customer on 2023 R1, and for the next versions. For the cloud customers, the version was actually released on 2022 R2.4, so that was a version released in April. So you can already access this report, which is available in the license folder. Okay, so the second question was about the automation part. I spent time explaining that embedded folders can be defined in the license, and then automatically the consumption related to the Java instances in these folders will not be counted. So what I meant is that the automation is around the fact that once you have defined once you have defined the path which should be embedded, automatically the license will not count any consumption for the installation. What is not automated is that we don't have a full content around embedded paths. So if Java is on a WebLogic or on an Oracle database client or in a CBEL path, you need on your side to define using the exemption by path. You need to define these embedded paths, and then automatically the license will avoid counting consumption for these specific Java instances. Here we go. The next slide is very similar to the last one you got, in early May. The next version is 2023 R1. So this is both a cloud and an on-premise version. The release date is on June 28th, and the feature that you will get with 2023 for cloud customer, this is more about fixes and a minor announcement on the way we manage Mac application bundles. For the on-premise customer, of course, there will be much more, which is the full new features released since the 2022 R2 version, which was released in December of 2022. So if you go to docs.flexera.com, you will picking up the Flexera 1 item feature by release. You will get what are the new features. You see this bundle inventory collection from custom installation location on Mac device, quite specific, agent related. And you will see that in April, we had a number of massive announcements. The SAM Operations Hub, the Oracle Java worksheet, the Oracle Inventory Troubleshooting report. So you will see month by month what got added to the release. And basically, if you go down to January 2023 and go up to end of May, this is everything that on-premise customers will get. Okay. The other news, so I didn't mention, but we have an Intune inventory adapter, which is still a beta version. We support inventory and compliance for Linux VMs on the OS, which is an extension of the of what we can do. The allocation reason is also an announcement of the documentation you can bring to your allocations. So this is a version that brings a lot, and particularly this SAM Operations Hub. There was a full SAM best practice webinar on that back in April. Have a look to it, but this is probably a very good reason, because it comes with something like 13 reports and new screens. This is a good reason to migrate to 2023 if you're an on-premise customer. And maybe just on that, I sometimes discuss with customers who say, oh, we are cautious, and when we generally don't migrate to a new version, a new major version. So I just wanted to emphasize the fact that we have monthly releases with the cloud version, with the Flexera 1 item. So the version that you will see and that you will get on June 1st is not a brand new version with big technological disruptions. This is an incremental version which has been adding new features since December. And I would say, this is this may have been wise a while ago when applications were on premise, and there were some big bounds, in the new versions, and then the R2, for instance, was fixing some issues. Here we have incremental updates and fixes. It happens. So I would say 2023 R1 version should not be considered as a new version, but the 6th version released since January 2023. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about in the news is the SAM Best Practice Hub that I often give a pointer to. So this community document covers a number of topics. So particularly, it covers the 3 big topics that have been a focus in terms of user experience: the SAM Operations Hub, the SAM Publisher Hub, which is coming in the end of Q3, and the SAM Optimization Hub, which got released in December 2022. So these documents will give you full details on these hubs, and also will give you all the links to the past SAM Best Practice webinars. And if you go through this document, you will see that if you're on-premise, it gives you a lot of links to many community solutions. For instance, the SAM Operations Hub brings a new report that shows what are the virtual machines that vCenter reports and that are not inventoried. If you open this document, you will get actually many of these gap inventory gap reports about vCenter, but also merge computers, which is a more technical issue, Oracle troubleshooting. So here you can, in advance, get a number of reports which are embedded, so the SQL code is in these reports. And if you migrate to 2023, I would advise that you use the out-of-the-box versions that have been now productized. But if you're in an older version and want to take advantage of this, let's say, vCenter inventory gaps visibility, you can use the solution which is in this document. Many solutions and many visualization and explanations about what is coming. Next item in our roadmap being the SAM Publisher Hub, which will be available for on-premise customer for 2023 or 2. But that will be for cloud customers. So we will have probably a part of it in July, which is the new publisher screen. That will be the entry point for working on let's say, Microsoft, and the hub, which is the visualization part of the SAM Publisher screen, and that will give you snapshot and trend data, will come a little bit later. And finally, if you go down this document, you will see all the details on the SAM Optimization Hub and what each of the reports is doing. And this is pretty sophisticated and can bring a big help. So have a look to this document. You will get first level of understanding, and then have a look to your own report. For instance, this Oracle optimum virtualized architecture for Oracle option will really show you where to set the VMs depending on what options are installed and used, and can lead to massive saving. Okay. So let's move on and let's go to the core topic of today, which is the Flexera Business Adapter Studio. So the headline says a powerful tool for your integrations and automations. So let's move on. And in the agenda, so I already covered the agenda. So you have two versions, one which is on the beacon and one which is full. I will demo mostly the full version, but this I will explain. This is exactly the same, but not exactly the same functioning, and some limitations or some, I would say, additional features if you have the full version for on-premise. I will go through the general principles, how it works, tips and tricks, and show real-life examples. I will spend most of this session showing the business adapter and showing how it works. So there are not, there are some slides, but I would say I will spend more time showing things. So we have two versions that address two different situations. So first we have a beacon version. If I go on the beacon, this is the beacon user interface. If you are not using the beacon on the application server, which is my case, unfortunately, you have a node which is called business imports. And then when you open, you can create a new business import. And what will happen is that if you are on the beacon, when you click on new, it will launch a UI. After you have given a name to the integration you are going to create, it will launch the UI of the Business Adapter Studio that you see here, which is, and we spent quite some time on it today, so you will get more details. So the beacon has a version of the business importer, Business Adapter Studio, that actually, works on both cloud and on-premise. So you can use, if you're an on-prem customer, and run the Business Adapter Studio from the beacon. And the way it works, this beacon will generate files. So the idea is that it generates files. Let's say you do a purchase order import. The beacon Business Adapter Studio will read the data, let's say, of your Excel file. If this is an Excel file that you use for creating purchase orders. It will generate the file. It will also generate another XML file which includes the mapping, how the data needs to be imported. And then this data will be exported to the batch process application server. And locally, the batch process application server, so it could be in your premise, if you're on premise, but it could be also on the Flexera cloud environment. If you're a cloud customer, the data, the files will be read, and the SQL queries that will import the data in the actual tables of FlexNet Manager or ITAM will be executed locally on the application, on the batch process application server. Interestingly, when you run the imports from the beacon, you will see the import logs that will show in the system task history. So I don't have actually a true beacon import. But if I go to this, version, you will see that here, this is actually an inventory import, this one, but you will see that if you run a Business Adapter Studio report from the okay, just give me a second. Okay. So if you run the Business Adapter Studio from a beacon, you will see, just like I was showing here, the logs and the summary, and if it failed, if it worked, and so on. So I would say this is a very important point that gives visibility on the process, on the processes. So this is, I would say, an advantage for the beacon version. So I would say we recommend using the Beacon Business Adapter Studio anytime. A direct SQL connection to the target database, so just talking for on-premise customer, is not needed. The on-premise version, that is, I would say, a full version that has the same UI but a number of additional options. It has the same capabilities. So the idea, and you will see, is to read data, is to write into ITAM or FlexNet Manager, is to update or create existing objects such as licenses, contracts, purchase orders, locations, corporate units, enterprise groups. And it has, in addition to the Beacon version, a direct connection to the SQL Server database of FlexNet Manager. So it allows to use physical tables. I will show you a little bit, and it offers a custom SQL object, which allows actually to write directly SQL from the business adapter. So you need to know very well the database schema. You need to be very careful about what you do, because with SQL queries, you could break a database. But it opens to, I would say, sophisticated options. It does manage logging. So if you run a full version of the business adapter, I will show you, you can create a log that you can place anywhere you want. However, it will not upload logs that will appear in the system tasks. This is a little bit complex, but basically, a Business Adapter Studio is not linked to a task, so that there will be no showing. I've seen in the past, people putting the logs on some places, but I don't think in the end, 99% sure, it's never appearing as a business. You don't see the logs in the system tasks logging. Okay. So on the general principles, and I will switch a little bit between what we see and what we have in the screen and on the slide and the tool. So the general principle is that if I open, let's say, user allocation, general principle is that you read in a source, so you write in the target. So on the on-premise version, this is a full version, you can actually choose which target you have. If you use this default setting from the computer, in the registry, we have the target application server, the target SQL database, which is registered. on the either application server or on the beacon. If you want to set up a SQL connection, you need to point to a SQL instance which has what makes it look like a business a FlexNet Manager database. So you need to have a table which contains a number of records, and then the business adapter knows once it's connected to a SQL database, it knows what version of the application it is talking to, and it can load some files which are actually the objects that can be updated by the business adapter. So first, you connect to a destination. If you're on a beacon, you don't even have this node. You have, because the beacon knows which is the connected cloud instance or on-premise instance. So the Business Adapter Studio on the beacon will not let you decide where you want to write. It will write where the beacon writes. That's it. The second step, so this is the reader part. You know where you write and you know what you read. So the Business Adapter Studio has a number of connections, which are protocols. So XML, Oracle database, or Oracle SQL, ODBC, SQL Server, CSV, and Excel, which are very often used. And the idea is that with these, various protocols and connectivity, you can connect to a source. So here, I've used some Excel files. I will explain why Excel is better than a CSV, for instance. So if you use an Excel file, then it's quite simple. You define which Excel file you want to read, and you will get the the data that will be read. I will be a little bit more precise on that. So you read in a source, you pick up eventually a file, you have a query, knowing that this is SQL. So, but you can't do very sophisticated queries using the CSV or CSV or Excel source. You can't cast the data. There are things you cannot do easily. However, if you use a SQL server connection, you can have a select query, which is as sophisticated as you want. If you want to, let's say, trim the data when you read, filter the data, and so on, you will be able to actually extend this query. Knowing that, be careful, this auto-generate SQL query will always move back to this very basic select star from sheet 1. So here, we have a number of so the first two ones are more related to metadata, but if you have, let's say, an Excel file with 10 sheets, you will see here, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, etc. So you have to pick up, which sheet you want to read from. So this is about, the source. Encrypt connection information. It can be useful if you want to secure the data, knowing that the data is on the beacon. But you need to make sure that you have the right DLLs. For instance, on this demo system, this encrypt connection raises an error that I'm missing a DLL used for the encryption. So, but on the production system, I guess, this is something that will be managed. And then, very important, this is part of the tips and tricks, but I'm showing it from now on. Always activate these two, which by default are set to no. If you use a full version of the business adapter, you should, activate these two options. That will allow to do more things, such as using physical tables. I will show you what it is. Okay. You could, there are more options that you can use, but I would say the first two ones are quite important. And one of these two options is allowing you to see the list of properties. So basically, if you click on this refresh, what happens is that the Business Adapter Studio reads into this Excel file in the Sheet 1 tab, and it will read the data that I see here, which is this data, which is displayed as in an Excel file. So that's a good thing. It was an Excel file. But I would say, think about it like in a table, and that's what will happen actually. This Excel file will be stored in a table if you decide to use physical tables. And then going back to the the second node, which is about how you read, there are options on the bottom that get visible if you choose to display advanced options. And particularly this one is interesting. It will allow actually to store the data, and it will allow to do more things. We will see that later. This is more in the advanced feature. But knowing that you have the data stored in the database, only for on-premise, of course, will allow you to eventually troubleshoot and understand what's happening. This little flag, will just allow to catch from the rows. Otherwise, it would be generate column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so this is the first step. We read in a source. So we write in a destination. We read in a source. We have a query and decide eventually to have some filtering and some data, some use of the physical tables. And then the goal of a business adapter is basically to take this data and use it to either create records in the target, in ITAM or in Flexera Manager, or to update records in ITAM. And you will be able, once you have and maybe I will create a new one just to start from a white page. Let's say I want to read from an Excel file. I will pick up randomly an Excel file. This one, let's say. Okay, yeah, that's the issue I was mentioning. If you don't have the DLL, you have an issue. And once you have that, so you need to pick up which worksheet you want to work on. Okay, and you pick up the right, let's say, page. Okay, and once you have these purchase orders, you can, in the let's call it PO imports, you can map the data. That's the goal between the source that you see here and the destination that has a number of objects. So here, I'm not going to create line by line a purchase order importer, but the idea that you have the object. So actually, a purchase order line is a purchase order and a line below the purchase order. So I'm going to show you some of the lines, just some of the steps, just to make it clear. So if I go to the purchase order line, which is a child, and you see that there is an important topic, which is a sequence of these nodes. If the idea, if the goal of this purchase order creation is to create a purchase order line, which is in a purchase order and which is linked to, let's say, a location, you see here, the idea that you need to do the reverse. So the final object you want to create is a purchase order line. But before you create a purchase order line, you need to create the parent. And before you create the parent, you need to catch the location, let's say. So I'm going to add the location node. Okay. And okay, so here I wanted to put it on top. So you can then, move up the location to be the first step. So hopefully I will really spend more time on that. And let's say, a purchase order is linked to a publisher. So I'm going to add, the publisher node, which is actually a vendor in ITAM. So, and the idea that you are going to map the data that you have as a source. So let's say the location name, which is location is an enterprise group, so it's a path. Let's say EMEA/France/Paris, and you will be able to map each of the object attributes, which are provided out of the box by the business adapter. You will be able to map each of the objects with the fields that you see here. So basically, this is reading from the Excel file that has been loaded. So you can have a field value, you can have a fixed value, or you can have eventually a SQL value. And again, this is for on-premise when you have a direct connection to the SQL database. So here, I would pick up a field and I will pick up the location. There is a autocomplete. If you type locate, you see location. And very important, this is one thing that you will see again and again. Every time you have a target object, you need to use one or more of the properties of the object to match the target data. Because indeed, if we let's say import new purchase, we may want to link the purchase to existing locations. Hopefully, you've already managed your location tree as a previous step in the project. So very important, when you import a purchase, you want actually to link the purchase to an existing location. And here, at the root of each of the objects, you can decide if you want to update, create, or just, do nothing, which is what I recommend for a purchase import. Do nothing but catch, the location ID from the name of the location, which is actually a full path. So if I show back the data, you see these names are not just the end name of the location. This is the full path, which is unique in the location table in item and in Flexera Manager. So you will basically here this first step says, please catch the location ID of the row. So when it will go here, it will check if there is EMEA France, and link and keep this ID later to link the purchase order line to the location ID. So this is quite database oriented, but you see here there is a location ID, and the location ID there is a little bit of magic. It will suggest the location which has been defined earlier in the sequence of objects that are going to be either checked or updated or even created. So just to show you that this is a dynamic field, if I name this one location ID 2, you will see that if you go down in the location field, you will see that automatically this attribute, the field exposed here, are relative to the nodes which have been set earlier. So if you reopen a business adapter a second time, unfortunately, this won't be dynamic any longer. So you can use, let's say, a SQL value, which would be location ID. Okay, so I hope it is clear. So I'm going to set it back to, let's say, location ID. And the idea that here you see all level provided means we provide the full path of this hierarchical object, which has a parent, a great parent, and so on. The location is a succession of items. And the first step is, you have the location that will be recognized when in the data there is a location. As a second step, you want to match the publisher of the purchase order detail. That's one of the fields, which actually maps to this vendor table. So let's name it publisher, just to make it very explicit, publisher. And here, I can even call that the publisher ID. And the way you define a publisher is by its name. It's quite simple. So here in the source Excel file, that needs to be always relevant to a template. So you will always use the same Excel file with the same columns. to feed again and again purchase data into item. So you can here, use the purchase name and again the name of the publisher and use it as a matching criteria. So I will not spend hours, but then you have the purchase order, and the purchase order is defined by a purchase order number. So here, you will take the purchase order number, which is here, which is again, a key, the purchase order date. So I will not go step by step, but the idea that you create the mapping, you generate your sequence of objects that will need to be updated, and the business adapter will step by step catch eventually the IDs, the linked object IDs, will either create or update the intermediate objects. If you decided here, the purchase order needs to be created or updated. Here, I want to create purchase order so that I can create a purchase order line, which is, the link between the purchase order ID and a purchase order line number. So then there is a PO line number. Or we can use the row line number if we don't have the purchase order line number, we have it. So you define each object, intermediate object, that will be useful for the publisher ID, for instance, here. The part number will be one of the fields, which is the SKU number. Okay, and that way you have defined your integration mapping. You need to save, of course. So you need to save the mapping, and what will happen is that this mapping will be stored in an XML file that will contain, line by line, which are the various fields that are in source and what the mapping is. Okay, so it would take more than 1 hour to create, multiple imports in front of you, but I wanted to show you some specific use case which are interesting. So here, for instance, if you open from a beacon, we have some out-of-the-box predefined integrations and templates. So if you go to Flexera software, if you go to beacon, if you go to DDI, you will get a number of predefined imports, and the purchase order is one. And you recognize a little bit what I did. It is the same type of logic. So what I mean is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel if you want to do a purchase order import. And even taking a step back, if you want to do a purchase order import, you can use the out-of-the-box importer, which is here, data input. And we provide some ways to do some one-off upload. And for instance, to import purchase orders, you need to catch the template, and you can directly pick up or fill a template which exists, and make the import using the web UI. But unfortunately, this is not the case for all the objects. You cannot create a computer from the UI, or sometimes you want to do something with the purchase order creation that would be more powerful. You want to create new contracts on the fly. So you will, thanks to this Business Adapter Studio, which is not an end user tool, it is more, an admin tool. With this Business Adapter Studio, you will be able to define mappings, and you will be able to create that. So I have one which is actually ready to use. So this purchase order line, you see we have a number of fields which are very close to the template you were seeing earlier. And if I show the data, there is a number of purchases that we see here that have been set in the file. And if you run the import, so you can first simulate an import. And I would advise that you use your UAT, your test instance, to simulate import. That's really where you can create a lot of noise in your database. A first step is that you could eventually simulate just to see if there is a SQL error, if things are happening correctly. Here you see that everything looks good. And here, as a second step, you can import. And again, what I'm showing here is not what you can do with the beacon. With the beacon, you can schedule an import or you can execute an import. But here, this is, because you have a direct connection to the database, you can do the simulation and the import. And here, if I do that, the Business Adapter Studio directly connects to the database. And you see then, the summary of what happened, which is, some vendors. So 18 times the vendor, which is unique actually, has been matched, but it was existing. It's Microsoft, so it was already in my database. And then, one time we created a purchase order, which is a parent of the purchase. And then it created also 18 purchase order lines, which are nothing else than what you are seeing here. So if I open the web UI, you will see that in the purchase, if I type global, you see these 18 lines have been created. And where it can be tricky is that if you put, a purchase type which is not correctly set up, if you put not software subscription, but if you put, something which is wrong, you may turn into having errors, or if the dates are not well interpreted. That's one of the very painful things that could happen with imports. If you use a CSV file, you will get the driver. The access driver is automatically interpreting the field values according to the first 13 rows it sees. So if you only have, let's say, contract numbers which are numerical, while it's a text field, the CSV import may misinterpret and think that this is a numerical value. Same on the dates. Sometimes the dates are not recognized if you flip between the formats, US format and so on. So my advice is to always use an Excel file where you force the column, the column formats. A date is a date. A contract number is actually a text. And then you will create this purchase, and everything will work fine. So what I wanted to show is that if I go back to the, you see that there was a contract number C123 and the contract description, and I have a contract node, which is not creating the new object. So basically. And same, on the locations. The locations are not, created on the fly. So if I go back to my web UI, if I add maybe the location to my list, you will see that when some data is in the source but not recognized in the destination, we don't create we don't link. So here there is no contract because actually this contract is not pre-existing. So what I just wanted to do is, for instance, I'm going back to the Business Adapter Studio. I'm going to change the contract import behavior. And I will say, yes, you can create, you can update. I will map the contract number, which is, use this property for matching data. I will map the contract description, which is one of the fields. Stay. And if I run again, normally the purchase orders are going to be recognized, but they're going just to be updated, you see, because they already existed in my target. Every time, the business adapter found a purchase order which had the same purchase order and the same line number. So what happened is that each purchase order got refreshed from the data, and you see, Okay, so the contract number has not been updated. Okay, so I'm just okay. So I have to check something, but I'm showing the right data because I've done a number of imports. So if I go back here, these are these things. Contract description. So I will check if the contract got created, C123. C123 got created. Then if I check the purchase, okay, so the purchase didn't get linked. So I will not troubleshoot for a long time, but create new object. Yes, it's probably that the contract ID was not yet mapped. So of course, it was not able. I have to find it. Here we go. So the contract ID was not mapped. So the data was not updated. And now if I, import again. So here, at the first step, the contract got created. And as a second step, the purchase will be updated. And this time, we should see from the contract, for instance, the list of purchase, which have been linked to the contract. So just wanted to show that this is, depending on what you decide. For instance, I had some dummy locations, Toto, Lulu, etc. It's very important that you don't set the location ID or the location to be created. Otherwise, you will potentially break your location, which is a reference data. So be very careful not to flag this thing. And you see, the all level provided was not set. So that's maybe why the EMEA purchase were not linked. So here, I'm checking location ID is mapped. And if I run it last time, you will see that the purchase that I was seeing, purchase that had no location when I made the first check, no location. So hopefully now they have, okay, so not on the right one. So I will take this global. And you see now the location is still not set, so I have not fixed the issue, but the contract number is visible. So it's really step by step when you so yeah, the location was not matched. So maybe when I put EMEA /France, it was maybe EMEA /Paris in my database. So that's why the location didn't get mapped correctly. Okay, so in the database it's EMEA /France. Okay, so this one is here, and maybe in my data it was not set correctly. So this is really about understanding how it works. Hopefully you got a little view, and then step by step doing more complex things. Another thing I wanted to show, so maybe before I show that. Okay, so I think I've explained a little bit the reader and the writer step. You need to use the Beacon Business Adapter Studio when possible to get the logs. You need to activate these advanced options. If you use a CSV, you need to, so hopefully the data will be correctly recognized. Otherwise, you can use something called schema.ini, which is containing the description. So you need to put the right field, the right file name first, and then it describes column by column which are the formats of each of the columns. So what is the name, what is the format, and then once you have in the schema.ini file, which is actually for another import here, in the same folder as your Business Adapter Studio XML file, the CSV file columns will be correctly interpreted. So that's an important thing you need to keep in mind. Okay, think about, so use the log object. Did not show too much, but once you're on the Business Adapter Studio, you have various types of objects. And one item is log. And here you can say where you want the log to be set, knowing that on the beacon it will automatically be uploaded. But here, you see the /date, so you can put a name which is relative, and then you can, put a debug log, for instance, into a file or into the database. So you have multiple ways you can extract the logs, and you will be able to go through the sometimes very verbose content of the log. Okay. So the data mapping needs, yes. So here, this is something I wanted to show in the second business adapter I wanted to show, which is an allocation for users. So here, I have a mix in this business adapter of very simple things. Basically an allocation of a user to license is a user that you find with his email. Then eventually you recognize the vendor of the license. You can eventually create the license. That's what this business adapter does. It creates the license with the name, the version, and the comment. It says, created from the Adobe portal, for instance. And the last step, once you have the user, once you have the license, is to create a software license allocation. This is one of the objects which is offered. So if I take back, the file I had, which was an Excel file, this file is one of the reports you can get from the Adobe portal, but there is another report which is called the Adobe license position, which is way better. But this one has a big downside. It will contain, if a user belongs to multiple groups, let's say Illustrator and Adobe, you will get actually, the various groups in the same line. So what I wanted to show is that when I did this one, for instance, this integration, reading the data from the Adobe export, knowing that you can directly query the Adobe API, and there is a solution in the community on that. But the first step of this integration was to actually create a new table, which was called definitive license for the mapping. And then, there was this ugly query, which is actually splitting the column, which may have multiple commas, into multiple columns. So the idea that you can use SQL, which is one of the offered objects. SQL custom query is called. And once you use a custom query, you can write any data that will, I'm going to delete this item, but you can write, a query that will actually use and will update the physical table that this business adapter creates. You remember when I showed you, in the first node, in the second node, you can choose to use a physical table. This table is called ECM allocate. You could give it the name you want, of course. And once you have this table created, and I show you what it looks like. For instance, this I was showing you, purchase order imports. So here, this is ECM import PO line. This is the import I was showing, for instance. And you see that the data in this file, you see actually the data of the file, which is what was in Excel is created in the table. And here you have even more things which are did we match the locations? So you have more information which is fed when you run the import, which actually says if the reseller was captured, the ID, the publisher ID, and so on and so on. So this is more technical data, but you see that when you do the import with the Business Adapter Studio, it creates a physical table, and then you can do a second step in SQL that will actually split the data, or you can do a second step in SQL that will take the data from the temp table, modify it on the fly, and directly update some objects eventually that are not exposed in this Business Adapter Studio. The license consumption is not exposed. We have the license, we have many attributes, but not the license consumption. So you can use a Business Adapter Studio with a SQL query to actually update the license consumption for the custom metric licenses using a SQL query. The last thing I wanted to show on the software license allocation, what is it? Software license allocation is a user ID. It's a user linked to a license ID. Each of them is used for matching data. It has a status, which is allocated. It could be permanent. It could be, you decide the status. And very important, every time you have an import or a creation of an object, you have, what do we do with the records we don't find in the destination? So here, let's say you had Illustrator with 52 users already allocated into item of FlexNet. If the new query from the Adobe portal showed that there are just 40 users, if you pick up the second from the bottom, this one, it will actually delete the allocations which are not in your Excel file, and it will create the allocations that are in your Excel file and that were not in your target file. So think about this, this insert behavior, which is documented here. And maybe a last one on the license side. So here I did not, but let's say in the source you have Illustrator in the source, and the license is called Adobe Illustrator. You can define a mapping between the source data you get and data transformation on the fly that you deliver. So that's why you can do mapping. A typical use case is if you have a mapping for a CMDB status. ServiceNow is using 3 statuses. One which is installed and we call it active, or you can define the mapping in this step where you will read the data and transform it, and this is how the data will be actually pushed to FlexNet or to the item object. Okay, so we are a little bit short on time. I wanted to show you, so in this slide, you have 1 or 2 more slides. So I think that was, this is an extract of the customizing, FNMS session that I delivered. And the idea was to, create automations and show that if you are a cloud customer, you can do very sophisticated automations, and that's particularly this solution, which is on the community. So this solution is using the SOAP API, but now you have a REST API, which does the job very well. And this document, I'm going to open. This document gives you all the details on an integration that you can set up where you read in your SaaS instance, so Flexera One item here, you read the data in the SaaS instance using either a PowerShell or a full version of the Business Adapter Studio. So it can query the REST API or it can query the SOAP API. Once you have the data here, you can store the data in a local SQL database. And you can, after as many calculations and complex scripts you made locally in the SQL database, you can use the Beacon inventory business adapter to update your cloud instance back with, let's say, locations associated with computers. So this is what this example did. So I will not go in full details, but the Word document gives, a quite sophisticated allocation example where, by reading the list of computers which have no location and catching their IP address, computer name, and domain name, then, the data is compared to, there is a subnet mapping which is actually imported in this local database. So depending on the IP address and the subnet, there will be locations allocated to the computer. Or if we could not find, based on the locations, a second set will allocate based on the computer name, and the third will be based on the domain name of the computer. So this is the type of integration that would be extremely complex to do. That would use on-premise, typically a local SQL script. And you can absolutely, thanks to the fact that you can read the data with the Business Adapter Studio or with the PowerShell using the REST APIs or the SOAP APIs, which are exposing any report, for instance. You can read the data, you can process the data, do any calculation, and then allocating a location to a computer is something super simple that the inventory beacon Business Adapter Studio can do. So I hope it opens, ideas for automations, and that's one of the powerful things you can do. Okay, so I've been a little bit over time. Sorry for that. Thanks for your time, and hope you learn things. And maybe the best is for you to play with it. That's really how I have learned. There is a quite good documentation on the Business Adapter Studio, which is delivered with the, along with the FlexNet or Flexera One item documentation. So if you go to documentation, I should have started with that, but if you go at the root of the documentation, you see a quite complete using the business adapter. So it's a quite complete documentation that will give you a lot of details, but with these real life examples, I hope you got a little bit more on the logic of the tool. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.